الأول من الشهر الأول بيتأمر يعني ياخذون أوامرهم من عنده اللي هم الشركات الأمنية. خلوني إلى الزنزانة، كبلوني وتم خلع ملابسي بالقوة. يعني أسلوب من أساليبهم أنه القبض التناسلي للرجل يلفون عليه حبل ويجروه هيك مثل عملية الغاية من عندها. شنو هاي الأبرة تضربون إياها اللي أنا هسه حاليا عين بشركات أمنية مدنية للتحقيق مع معتقلين؟ بس أنا أقول لك هاي شركتين مؤكدة، شركة تايتن وشركة CI.
I was standing on the box. It is so strong, not breakable. They tied wires and started electrical shocks. I remember biting my tongue. My eyes felt they were about to pop out. I started bleeding from under the mask and I fell down, says Ali Shalal Al-Qasi, the man under the hood of the torture photos from the infamous Abu Ghraib prison. Another statement by another victim, quote, "Being forced into stripping off my clothes was strange, ugly, oppressive, and shocking. Moreover, the pleasure for the American soldiers from the torture to which I was exposed was horrifying." Unquote. They took away his name before they took away his breath. For weeks, he would wake in darkness, in rooms that stank of bleach and fear. Soldiers shouted in a language that sounded like thunder. He learned to answer only when ordered, to make noise only when instructed. Bark, crawl, beg, because silence meant something worse. When they photographed him, they didn't just record a body. They recorded the exact moment a person stopped being a person. If you've seen the photos, you probably think you know the story. You don't. The real story is the architecture behind those photos, the rules that permitted them, the promises that hid them, and the logic that pretended they worked. Over the next few minutes, we will open that architecture, how it was built, where it happened, why it was defended, how it failed, and what drives people to cross that line. In the aftermath of 9/11 attacks, the U.S. government made numerous illegal and unwise decisions that led to the widespread and systematic use of torture and cruelty in the U.S. detention facilities in Iraq, Guantanamo, Afghanistan, and secret prisons around the world. On January 11, 2002, the United States opened the detention facility at the U.S. Naval Base in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Nearly 800 Muslim men and boys have been held there over the years, all but a handful without charge or trial. 15 remain, some of whom have never been charged with a crime. This is one of the stories before the tortures by American government and military extended beyond worst measures. Let's talk about the Abu Ghraib prison and the tortures that took place there. The George W. Bush administration stated that abuses at Abu Ghraib were isolated incidents and not indicative of U.S. policies. This was disputed by humanitarian organizations including the Red Cross, Amnesty International, and Human Rights Watch, who claimed the abuses were part of a pattern of torture and brutal treatment at American overseas detention centers, including those in Iraq and Afghanistan and at Guantanamo Bay. The memos provided by CIA describes 10 techniques that were employed with at least 14 suspects and possibly many, many more. Those were attention grasp, facial hold, facial slap, walling, wall standing, stretched positions, cramped confinement, sleep deprivation, insect placed in a confinement box, and waterboarding. Related documents disclose the use of additional methods. One captive was interrogated for approximately 20 hours a day for 7 weeks, given strip searches, sometime in the presence of female interrogators, forced to wear women's underwear, forcibly injected with large quantities of IV fluid, and forced to urinate on himself, led around on a leash, made to bark like a dog, and subjected to cold temperatures. Another detainee was given a lunch of hummus pasta with sauce, nuts, and raisins, with the ingredients being pureed and injected in the rectum. Stripping prisoners of their clothes was a common form of sexual humiliation and degradation during the torture at Abu Ghraib. In 2004, Antonio Taguba, a major general in the U.S. Army, wrote in the Taguba report that a detainee had been sodomized with a chemical light and perhaps a broomstick. In 2009, Taguba stated that there was a photographic evidence of American soldiers and translators having raped detainees at Abu Ghraib. An Abu Ghraib detainee slash survivor told investigators that he heard an Iraqi teenage boy screaming and saw an army translator raping him while a female soldier took pictures. Another photo shows an American soldier apparently raping a female soldier. Ali Shalal al-Qasi, the man in the hood, even mentioned that they used to hear women hostages scream from another part of the detention center. He said, quote, "Women were put on the sector to our left on the second floor. We heard their cries. The guards used to get a male detainee to serve them food, but on one condition: the detainee should serve the female detainees food while only he is fully naked. We were all kept naked, by the way. We used to hear their screams. There was a guy called Frederick who used to harm them." Senior U.S. officials admitted that rape had taken place at Abu Ghraib. Some of the women who had been raped became pregnant and, in some cases, were later killed by their family members in Iraq in the instances of honor killing. Just to name a few: Ivan Frederick, Charles Grainer, Sabrian Harman, and Lindy England are one of the many American soldiers who partake in these monstrous activities against humans. And from the photos, it looked like they actually loved it, yet they serve only few years in the jail and are currently openly living their lives with privilege in America. Do you call this justice? Were these soldiers or people in command were sadists and enjoyed performing tortures and rape and murders? Well, let's find out. The abuses at Abu Ghraib primarily fall into two categories: intentional violent or sexual abuse, and abusive actions taken based on misinterpretation or confusion regarding law or policy. Policy was inconsistent, ambiguous, and changing, resulting in confusion regarding morally and legally acceptable standards for interrogation and detention. These lapses in policy contributed mostly to the second category of abuse. From the standpoint of leading people, it will be argued that the absence of effective supervision was the key contributing factor to the events at Abu Ghraib, whereby leaders failed to monitor, inspect, correct, and evaluate. The scandal came to widespread public attention in April of 2004 when a 60-minute news report was aired on April 28th by CBS News, describing the abuse, including pictures showing military personnel taunting naked prisoners. One memorandum dated May 22 of 2004 was from an individual described as the on-scene commander, but whose name had been redacted, so we're not sure who this person was. This individual referred explicitly to an executive order that sanctioned the use of extraordinary interrogation tactics by the U.S. military personnel. The torture methods sanctioned included sleep deprivation, holding prisoners, playing loud music, removing all detainees' clothing, forced them to stand in so-called stress positions, and also the use of dogs. CACI is a Fortune 1000 American tech company, specializes in defense infrastructure and technology. CACI's role in the torture and serious mistreatment of Iraqi civilians at Abu Ghraib is well documented. Major General Taguba investigated allegations of detainees' abuse at Abu Ghraib. And his 2004 report concluded that between October and December of 2003, numerous incidents of sadistic, blatant, and wanton criminal abuses were inflicted on several detainees, and that military intelligence and CACI interrogators instructed military police to set the conditions for detainees' interrogations. Numerous investigations into this sad chapter of American Army history have corroborated the significant leadership failures at various levels of the chain of command which failed to direct or enable, with dire consequences at Abu Ghraib. Over the last 2 decades, private companies have made billions by providing services in Iraq, Afghanistan, and the surrounding region. While the U.S. Department of Justice has responsibility for investigating and prosecuting international crimes by contractors, it has been rare for DOJ to bring any charges against contractors, and none have been brought for torture or crimes. Study done by an Irish neuroscientist, Shane O'Mara, and also published by Harvard University, states that torture doesn't work because the information secured is deeply unreliable for reasons rooted deep in the functioning of our brains. The book published by Shane is a detailed account of the human brain under stress and demonstrates that the torture is at best ineffective, usually counterproductive, and always inhumane. For example, it is well known that memory is reconstructive rather than reproductive in nature. Our recollection of life events fits newly acquired information into a framework of prior knowledge, expectations, and biases. At best, our memories are not entirely accurate. In extreme cases, they can be misleading or even totally false. The stress upon the brain not only does not help to get the accurate memory out of the victim, but most of the time the information is totally false as the victim's brain is only in survival mode and trying to spit out any information that he or she thinks can make the torturer satisfied or happy. Unfortunately, though, governments rarely let scientific evidence stand in the way of their political aims, and as O'Mara makes clear, the second Bush administration endorsed the techniques with little or no concern for their adverse effects, and despite existing evidence that they do not work as intended. From the information I have gathered and read so far, in my personal opinion, the main motivation was not just one, but many, but the most prevalent one was soldiers being sadistic. After reading tons of documents and memos, it shows that most of these tortures were done with the motivation of entertainment for the soldiers rather than getting any information out. And most of these detainees, whether male or female, were innocent, like normal people with normal lives. The motivations for the torture and abuse at Abu Ghraib were stemming not just from the individual actions of the low ranking soldiers involved, but primarily from a combination of situational, systemic, and psychological factors. In the other cases, the motivation seems simply to have been retaliation by guards for behavior of which they did not approve or for their own entertainment. In addition to the military police guards, two of the military police dog handlers were also charged with abuses for the inappropriate use of their military working dogs. The charged abuses included the following: using dogs to intimidate and frighten the detainees in the hard side for their own and the guards' entertainment, using dogs to back a naked detainee up against a wall, where the detainee was eventually bitten in the leg by the dog, and finally, using the dogs to commit an indecent act in an incident in which the dogs were used to lick peanut butter off the genitals of a male and the breasts of a female U.S. soldier. The other reason could be that soldiers legitimately believing if they can get useful information out from these detainees with no boundaries of brutality and can get them to a higher rank with a promotion. But it is not factual and less heavy compared to the idea behind soldiers doing it from a sadism standpoint. Now, to wrap it up, if you walked away from the Abu Ghraib photos thinking the problem was a handful of bad actors, you missed the point. The more dangerous lesson is quieter. Institutions under stress can re engineer the boundaries of what is permitted. We can change that. We as people. We do it by demanding accountability, by redesigning incentives, by valuing careful intelligence work, and by refusing euphemism that hide abuse. I have added all the sources and links of the information which you can find yourself and read through that I've used to write this essay.